Sometimes we all feel abandoned, like the world has turned its back when we need help most. Every parent knows that desperate fear of not being able to protect their child. Brynja held her little girl close as their village burned and their people scattered. The gods she had prayed to all her life stayed silent. "No God will save us now," she whispered, her voice breaking. He knelt before the mother and child and spoke simple words that changed everything. "I am the storm's answer, and I will not let you fall." From that moment, he became their shield against a harsh world. He stood guard as they crossed dangerous lands, creating a family bound not by blood, but by choice and courage. But what happens when even the strongest shield faces a force that could shatter it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The memory of that night would follow Brynja into her dreams for years to come. 3 months had passed since the raiders swept down from the northern peaks like wolves hungry for blood and gold. Her husband Eirik had been among the first to fall, his sword still in his hand when she found him in the morning mist. The great war axe that split his shield bore the mark of Jarl Grimwald's clan, their own supposed ally, their trading partner, their trusted neighbor. She could still smell the smoke that had risen from their burning granaries, still hear the screams that echoed across the fjord as families were torn apart. The raiders had come not for conquest, but for slaves, taking the young and strong while leaving the old and weak to starve in the coming winter. They had miscalculated with Brynja, a blacksmith's daughter, who had learned to fight alongside her husband, who had stood her ground even as others fled. But she had not been alone in those terrible hours. Halfdan Bareborn had emerged from the forest like something out of the old stories, his massive frame silhouetted against the burning sky. His war axe, Ironheart, gleamed with fresh blood, and his beard was singed from walking through flames to reach survivors. The weapon was legendary among the northern clans, forged by the dwarf smiths of old. Its blade had never dulled, its edge had never failed. More than that, it was bound to his bloodline by oaths and magic, responding to his will like an extension of his own arm. "I heard the screams from 20 leagues away," he had told her later, his voice rough with exhaustion and rage. "The wind carried them to me, and I knew the old peace was broken." Brynja had recognized him by reputation long before she met him. Every warrior in the northern territories knew of Halfdan Bareborn, the berserker who had fought in a dozen wars and never known defeat. They said he could fell an oak tree with a single swing of Ironheart, that he had once held a mountain pass against 100 men, that ravens followed him into battle because they knew where he went, death would surely follow. What the stories hadn't mentioned was the gentleness in his hands when he lifted her daughter Astrid from the rubble of their burning home. The child had been trapped beneath a fallen beam, conscious but too frightened to cry out. Halfdan had moved the heavy timber as if it weighed no more than a branch, then cradled the 7-year-old against his chest while speaking to her in soft tones that seemed impossible from such a fearsome man. "You are safe now, little raven," he had whispered. "The fire cannot touch you here." Now, 3 months later, they had found temporary refuge in a sheltered valley 20 miles south of their ruined village. It was not much a crude shelter built against a rocky overhang, a fire pit ringed with stones, stores of dried meat and grain that would last perhaps another month if they were careful. But it was warm, and it was hidden, and most importantly, it was theirs. Astrid sat near the fire, carefully mending her wooden doll with strips of leather. The toy had been damaged in the raid, its painted face scratched, one arm nearly torn away. She worked with the focused intensity of a child, trying to repair something that could never truly be made whole again. Since the attack, she spoke only when necessary, and then, in whispers, the bright, laughing girl, who had once filled their home with stories and songs, had retreated somewhere deep inside herself, emerging only in brief moments when she thought no one was watching. Brynja studied her daughter's profile in the firelight, noting how thin she had become despite their efforts to keep her fed. The trauma had stolen her appetite along with her voice, and no amount of coaxing could bring back the robust health she had enjoyed before the raid. It broke Brynja's heart to see how carefully Astrid held herself, as if expecting another blow to fall at any moment. "She reminds me of a sparrow I once found," said Magnus from his place across the fire. The old healer had attached himself to their small group after the raid, claiming he had nowhere else to go. In truth, Brynja suspected he had appointed himself their protector in his own way, sharing his knowledge of herbs and healing to keep them alive through the harsh months. "Broken wing, wouldn't eat, just sat in the corner of my hut, staring at nothing. Thought it would die for sure. What happened to it?" Brynja asked, though she wasn't certain she wanted to know. Magnus smiled, his weathered face creasing with genuine warmth. "Spring came, and one morning I woke to find it singing. Not because the wing had healed completely, it never did fly quite right, but something in the bird had decided to live again, broken wing and all." Halfdan emerged from the tree line carrying an armload of firewood, his breath steaming in the cold air. Even in the simple task of gathering fuel, he moved with the fluid grace of a predator, eyes constantly scanning for threats, hand never far from the hilt of Ironheart. The great axe hung at his side like a faithful hound, its presence both reassuring and ominous. Behind him came Tormod, a younger warrior who had joined them 2 weeks ago, claiming kinship to Brynja's dead husband. He was handsome in the way of young men who had never known true hardship, with golden hair and clear blue eyes that missed nothing. His silver arm ring marked him as nobility, though he claimed his family had lost their lands in the recent troubles. Brynja wasn't entirely certain she trusted him, but Halfdan seemed to accept his presence, and they needed every sword they could find. "The snow is coming early this year," Tormod announced as he added his own bundle of wood to their pile. "I can smell it on the wind. We'll need to find better shelter before the passes close." Halfdan said nothing, but Brynja saw the tension in his shoulders. They had all known this day would come. Their temporary refuge could not last through a northern winter. Soon they would have to choose between staying and slowly starving or venturing into the dangerous world beyond their hidden valley. Neither option offered much hope. "There are settlements to the south," Magnus offered quietly. "Beyond the Thornwall Mountains, if we could reach them before the worst storms." "If," Halfdan said, his voice carrying the weight of hard experience. "That's a word that's killed more men than plague or sword." Brynja felt the familiar knot of fear tighten in her stomach. Every decision now carried the weight of life and death, not just for herself but for her daughter. She had learned to live with constant anxiety, the persistent worry that had become as much a part of her as breathing. But she had also learned that paralysis was just another form of death. "Tell me about these southern settlements," she said to Magnus. "What kind of people live there? Would they welcome refugees?" The old healer's expression grew thoughtful. "Mixed folk, mostly. Some survivors like ourselves, some who've lived there for generations. They're not rich, but they're not starving either. The land is good, and they're far enough from the main trade routes to avoid most of the raiding." "Most of the raiding," Tormod repeated with a bitter laugh. "What about the rest?" "Nothing in this world is certain," Magnus admitted, "but it's better than what we have here. And the children there, they laugh and play like children should. Your Astrid might remember what it feels like to be young again." Brynja glanced at her daughter, still bent over her broken doll. The possibility of Astrid laughing again seemed as distant as the stars, but perhaps that was reason enough to try. Halfdan settled beside the fire, close enough to Brynja that she could feel the warmth radiating from his massive frame. Over the past months, she had grown accustomed to his presence, had come to depend on the sense of safety he provided simply by being near. It was a dangerous dependence, she knew. Nothing lasted forever, and placing all their hopes on one man's strength was a fool's gamble. But she had also seen the way he looked at Astrid, with a protectiveness that went deeper than duty. She had watched him spend hours teaching the girl how to tie knots and identify edible plants, patient lessons delivered in his quiet, rumbling voice. Whatever his reasons for staying with them, they went beyond simple charity. "We'll need to make a decision soon," Halfdan said, staring into the flames. "The hunting is getting scarce, and our stores won't last much longer. You think we should try for the southern settlements?" Brynja asked. My folds of Stuttig, my says narses prases." He was quiet for a long moment, weighing options in that careful way he had. "I think we should prepare for the journey," he said finally. "Gather what intelligence we can, plan our route, ready our supplies. Then, when the time comes to choose, we'll be ready for whatever we decide." It was a good answer, practical and non-committal. But Brynja could see something else in his expression, a shadow that spoke of hard choices and harder truths. Whatever path they chose, it would not be easy, and not all of them might survive it. As if sensing her thoughts, Astrid looked up from her mending, her large, dark eyes meeting Brynja's across the fire. For just a moment, something flickered there, not quite hope, but perhaps the memory of what hope had once felt like. It would have to be enough. In a world where the gods had fallen silent and the future stretched dark and uncertain, the memory of hope was precious as gold. Outside their sheltered valley, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of snow and the promise of harder days to come. The attack came at dawn, when the mist still clung to the valley floor and their fire had burned down to glowing embers. Brynja woke to the sound of horses' hooves on stone, a rhythmic drumming that sent ice through her veins. Beside her, Astrid clutched her wooden doll tighter, the damaged toy's loose arm finally separating completely in her frightened grip. "Raiders," Halfdan whispered, already on his feet with Ironheart in his hands. The great axe seemed to hum with anticipation, its ancient steel catching the first pale light of morning. 24. Maybe more. They've found our trail. Magnus struggled to rise, his old bones protesting the sudden movement. Tormod was already gathering their few valuable possessions, his face grim but determined. They had always known this moment might come. Their hidden valley was not hidden enough, their tracks not covered well enough, their luck not strong enough to last forever. "Who are they?" Brynja asked, pulling Astrid close while reaching for her own sword. The blade felt foreign in her grip after months of relative peace, but the weight of it was reassuring. "Jarl Grimwald's men," Halfdan replied, his voice carrying a deep note of anger. "Same bastards who burned your village. They must be hunting survivors, cleaning up loose ends." The sound of hooves grew closer, accompanied now by rough voices and the jingle of mail. Through the morning mist, Brynja could see shapes moving between the trees, armed men on horseback, spreading out to surround their camp. There would be no escape through stealth or speed. They had been found, and now they would have to fight. "Take Astrid into the rocks," Halfdan commanded, his eyes never leaving the approaching threat. "Find the deepest crack you can, and keep her there no matter what happens." "I won't leave you two." "You will," he said, turning to meet her gaze. In his eyes, she saw something she had never seen before, not just determination, but desperate love. "Your daughter needs you alive more than I need you beside me. Go now, while there's still time." Brynja wanted to argue, wanted to stand and fight beside this man who had become so much more than her protector. But Astrid's small hand in hers was cold with fear, and she knew Halfdan was right. Some battles were won with courage, others with wisdom. This one required choosing which was which. She kissed him quickly, fiercely, tasting salt and morning air, and the promise of things that might never be. Then she lifted Astrid and ran for the rocky outcropping behind their shelter, her daughter's broken doll clutched forgotten in her free hand. The first raider broke through the tree line just as Brynja reached the rocks. He was a young man, barely grown, with the kind of eager cruelty that came from proving oneself to older, harder warriors. His spear was aimed at Magnus, who stood defiantly near the fire, despite his age and frailty. Halfdan's war cry shattered the morning silence like thunder breaking over mountains. The sound was not entirely human, part rage, part grief, part something deeper and wilder that spoke of ancient bloodlines and forgotten oaths. Ironheart caught the morning light as it swept through the air, and the young raider's spear snapped like kindling before the legendary blade opened his throat. Blood sprayed across the trampled earth of their camp, dark and steaming in the cold air. The sight of it sent other memories flooding through Brynja's mind. Her husband's death, the burning village, the screams that had echoed across the fjord. She pressed deeper into the rocks, pulling Astrid with her, trying to shield her daughter from witnessing more violence. But Astrid was watching through her fingers, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fascination. She had seen death before, had lived through the nightmare of their village's destruction. This was different, though this was watching someone fight for them, kill for them, bleed for them. The distinction mattered in ways Brynja was only beginning to understand. More raiders poured into the camp now, their leader shouting orders from horseback. He was a scarred veteran with grey streaking his beard, the kind of man who had survived a dozen battles through cunning rather than courage. Brynja recognized the type her father had pointed out such men in the trading markets, warning her that they were more dangerous than the young hotbloods because they knew exactly how far they could push before consequences caught up with them. Tormod proved his worth in those first moments. His sword worked clean and efficient as he protected Magnus from two attackers at once. Whatever doubts Brynja had harbored about his character were swept away by the sight of him standing over the old healer like a son defending his father. His silver arm ring caught the light as he parried a desperate thrust, then riposted with lethal precision. But it was Halfdan who truly became legend in those minutes. The berserker rage that had made him famous across the northern territories was not the mindless fury of stories, but something far more terrifying, a cold, calculated savagery that turned combat into artistry. Ironheart moved in his hands like a living thing, carving through mail and bone with equal ease. 3 men fell to his blade in as many heartbeats, and the others began to give ground despite their numerical advantage. The raider captain cursed and spurred his horse forward, a heavy sword gleaming in his fist. "Enough! Take the berserker alive if you can, but kill the others. We only need one to tell us where the rest are hiding." The words hit Brynja like a physical blow. They weren't just hunting survivors, they were hunting information. Someone had told them that more people had escaped the village, that there were others hidden somewhere in the wilderness. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade, the knowledge that one of their own had sold them for silver or safety or simple spite. Magnus stepped forward then, his voice carrying clearly over the sounds of battle. "You want information, you dog-cursed scum? Here's what I know: you'll find nothing but death in these mountains. The old gods may be silent, but the land itself remembers blood, and it's thirsty." The old healer's words seemed to strike the raiders like a physical force. Several of them glanced nervously at the mist-shrouded peaks around them, hands moving unconsciously to protective amulets. In the north, curses were not taken lightly, especially when spoken by one who clearly knew the old ways. But their captain was made of sterner stuff. "Pretty words from a dead man," he snarled, raising his sword. Astrid's broken doll fell from Brynja's nerveless fingers as the blade swept down. The wooden toy struck the stone with a hollow sound that seemed to echo far longer than it should have. In that moment, watching the sword descend toward Magnus, Brynja felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart, which was already scarred by loss, but something deeper. Some last faith in fairness or justice, or the possibility that good people might be allowed to live in peace. The blow never fell. Halfdan reached the captain's horse in a single bound, Ironheart carving upward through stirrup and leg and saddle with unstoppable force. The raider captain screamed as he toppled from his mount, his sword spinning away into the mist. The horse reared and bolted, carrying its dying rider's blood into the forest. The remaining raiders broke then, their courage failing in the face of Halfdan's inhuman skill and Magnus's curse. They fled back through the trees like beaten dogs, leaving their dead behind in their haste to escape. The morning mist seemed to swallow them, and within moments the valley was quiet again, except for the labored breathing of the survivors. Brynja emerged from the rocks on trembling legs. Astrid pressed close against her side. The broken doll lay forgotten on the stone where it had fallen, its painted face now chipped beyond repair. Like so much else in their lives, it was damaged beyond fixing, a casualty of a world that seemed determined to destroy everything innocent and beautiful. "Are you hurt?" she asked Halfdan, her voice barely more than a whisper. He shook his head, though blood dripped from a shallow cut on his forehead where a raider's axe had come too close. "We're alive. That's more than I expected when I saw them coming." Magnus was pale but unharmed, leaning heavily on Tormod's arm. "They'll be back," the old healer said quietly. "Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but they'll be back with more men. We can't stay here." "Then we go south," Brynja said, the decision crystallizing in her mind like ice forming on still water. "To the settlements beyond the mountains. Today, before they can regroup and follow." Halfdan nodded grimly. "Gather what you can carry. We leave within the hour." As they began breaking camp, Brynja picked up Astrid's broken doll and tucked it into her pack. Some things were worth saving even when they couldn't be repaired, if only to remember what had been lost. In a world where gods stayed silent and good people died for no reason, memory might be all the justice they would ever find. The journey south would be hard, perhaps impossible, but staying meant certain death, and fleeing meant at least the chance of life. It would have to be enough. The mountain path wound upward like a scar across the face of stone, treacherous with loose scree and hidden ice. 3 days had passed since they fled their valley refuge, and each step took them higher into a landscape that seemed carved by angry gods. The air grew thinner with every mile, burning their lungs and making their hearts race with exertion that would have been nothing at sea level. Magnus struggled more with each passing hour, his weathered face grey with exhaustion despite their frequent rests. His medicine pouch bounced against his hip as he climbed a worn leather satchel that contained the accumulated wisdom of 40 years as a healer. Inside were precious herbs gathered from hidden places, rare roots that could ease pain or break fever, powdered minerals that might mean the difference between life and death when properly applied. But the supply was dwindling. Magnus had used much of his stock, treating injuries and illnesses in their refugee camp, and the harsh mountain environment offered few opportunities to replenish what was lost. Brynja had seen him counting and recounting the small vials and wrapped bundles, his lips moving in silent calculations that never seemed to add up to enough. "Tell me about the plants we might find ahead," Astrid said quietly, walking beside the old healer with careful steps. It was the most she had spoken since the raid, her voice barely more than a whisper, but carrying genuine curiosity. The broken doll was tucked securely in her mother's pack, but she no longer seemed to need its comfort quite so desperately. Magnus smiled despite his fatigue. "Well now, little raven, that depends on how high we climb. Down in the green valleys, we might find willow bark for pain or meadowsweet to calm a troubled stomach. Higher up, where the snow never fully melts, there's mountain sage that can clear congestion from the chest. And the dangerous ones?" Astrid pressed, showing the first spark of her old self, the curious girl who had once peppered every adult with endless questions about how the world worked. "Ah, those are important to know too," Magnus replied, his teaching instincts overriding his exhaustion. "Wolf's bane with its pretty purple flowers, deadly poison if you don't know how to prepare it. And ice root, which looks harmless as winter grass but will stop a strong man's heart in minutes." Halfdan moved ahead of them, scouting the path with the patient thoroughness of a hunter who knew that one careless step might mean death for everyone depending on him. Ironheart rode across his back in its leather harness, the legendary axe's weight seemingly no burden at all to his massive frame. Every few hundred yards, he would stop and study the trail ahead, reading signs invisible to the others, scratches in stone that might indicate previous travelers, disturbances in the sparse vegetation that could mean watchers or predators. "The trail splits ahead," he called back to them, his voice carrying easily in the thin air. "One path goes higher, following the ridge, looks harder but more direct. The other winds down into a side valley before climbing again, easier going, but adds at least a day to our journey." Tormod wiped sweat from his brow despite the cold, his silver arm ring glinting in the pale mountain sunlight. The noble ornament seemed incongruous here, in this harsh wilderness, a reminder of softer times, when jewelry was worn for beauty rather than hidden for safety. But he had proven himself in the fight 3 days ago, and his opinions carried weight now in their small council of survivors. "Weather's holding for now," he observed, studying the grey sky with experienced eyes. "But I can feel change coming, pressure in the air, way the wind's shifting. If we're caught in a storm on the high path, we're dead. If we take too long on the low path, those raiders will catch us," Brynja countered, hefting her pack higher on her shoulders. The weight of their combined supplies seemed to grow heavier with each mile, but she had learned to ignore such discomfort. Pain, like fear, was something to be acknowledged and then set aside in service of survival. Magnus paused to catch his breath, one hand pressed against his chest. "Either way's a gamble," he wheezed. "Question is, which odds we like better, quick death from cold or slow death from pursuit?" The stark choice hung in the air between them like morning mist. Brynja found herself studying Halfdan's broad shoulders, noting the way he held himself against the mountain wind. Over the past months, she had learned to read his moods in small gestures, the set of his jaw when he was thinking through a problem, the slight tilt of his head when he heard something the rest of them missed, the careful stillness that came over him when violence was near. "What do you think?" she asked him, though she suspected she already knew his answer. "I think we trust in strength over caution," he replied without hesitation. "The high path tests us against the mountain. The low path leaves us exposed to enemies we know are coming." He turned to face them, his scarred features serious. "I'd rather fight ice and stone than steel and spite." It was a good answer, practical and honest. But Brynja could see something else in his expression, a flicker of uncertainty that he tried to hide. Even Halfdan Bareborn, legendary berserker and slayer of armies, was not immune to doubt when the lives of those he cared about hung in the balance. "Then we go high," she decided, shouldering her pack with renewed determination. "But we rope together once the path gets treacherous. If one falls, we all fall, or we all climb out together." Astrid nodded solemnly, understanding far more than any 7-year-old should about the weight of such decisions. The trauma of their village's destruction had stolen her childhood's innocence, but it had also given her a wisdom beyond her years. She knew that adults were not infallible, that the world was dangerous and uncertain, that survival often came down to choosing between bad options and worse ones. They began climbing again, their boots crunching on loose stone and patches of old snow. The path grew steeper with each turn, demanding careful placement of every step. Magnus fell behind, despite his best efforts, his breathing laboured and his face pale with exhaustion that went deeper than mere fatigue. "Here," Tormod said quietly, moving to walk beside the old healer. "Let me take some of that weight." He reached for Magnus's pack, but the healer waved him away with stubborn pride. "I've carried my own burdens for 70 winters, boy. I'll not start depending on charity now." "It's not charity," Tormod replied with surprising gentleness. "It's what we do for family, and like it or not, old man, we're family now." Magnus studied the younger warrior's face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Family he repeated, as if testing the word's weight. "Aye, I suppose we are at that." As Tormod shouldered part of Magnus's load, Brynja felt something shift in the dynamics of their small group. They were no longer just refugees thrown together by circumstance, but people choosing to care for each other despite the cost. The distinction mattered more than she had expected. Above them, the mountain path disappeared into mist and shadow, promising challenges they could not yet imagine. But for the first time since fleeing their valley, Brynja felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. They would climb together, or they would fall together. Either way, they would not face the darkness alone. The silver arm ring caught the firelight as Tormod turned it nervously around his wrist, a habit Brynja had begun to notice whenever their conversations turned to the past. They had found shelter for the night in a shallow cave, barely more than an indent in the mountain face, but it blocked the worst of the wind and hid their small fire from any watchers below. "You wear that ring like it burns you," Magnus observed, his keen healer's eyes missing nothing despite his exhaustion. "Yet you won't take it off." Tormod's hand stilled, his fingers touching the ornate silver band with something approaching reverence. "It was my father's," he said quietly. "And his father's before that, the only thing of value I have left from the old life." "What happened to your family's holdings?" Brynja asked, settling Astrid more comfortably against her side. The girl was listening intently while pretending to sleep, another habit she had developed since the village raid, gathering information while appearing vulnerable, as if knowledge itself might serve as armor against future surprises. "Same as happened to yours. In the end," Tormod replied with bitter honesty. "Raiders came in the night, not Grimwald's men, others, wearing no colors, claiming no lord. Professional killers hired by someone who wanted my father's lands, but couldn't take them by law or combat." He stared into the flames, his young face aged by memories that no amount of time would fully heal. "I was away when it happened, visiting my mother's family in the eastern settlements. Came home to find nothing but ashes and unmarked graves. My parents, my younger sister, even the servants who had been with our family since I was a boy, all dead." The silver arm ring seemed to pulse in the firelight, a symbol of noble heritage reduced to mere remembrance. Brynja understood why he couldn't remove it, why he wore it despite the danger it might represent. Sometimes the weight of memory was all that kept a person anchored to who they had been before the world broke apart. "The ring marks you as nobility," Halfdan said, from his position near the cave entrance, where he maintained watch over the path below. "Makes you a target for any who think ransoming lordlings might be profitable." "I know," Tormod admitted, "but if I take it off, if I let go of that last connection to my father's house, then they truly did kill everything. The name dies, the bloodline ends, and all those generations of honor and service mean nothing." Brynja felt a sharp pang of recognition. How many nights had she clung to Eirik's memory in the same way, refusing to let go even when holding on caused more pain than comfort? Grief was like that, a burden that became part of you, changing shape but never truly departing. "Honor doesn't die with rings or names," Magnus said gently. "It lives in what we choose to do with the time we have left." As if summoned by the healer's words, a low rumble echoed through the cave, not thunder, but something deeper and more ominous. Halfdan was on his feet instantly, Ironheart appearing in his hands as if by magic. The legendary axe hummed with tension, its ancient steel seeming to taste danger in the air. "What is it?" Brynja whispered, pulling Astrid closer. "Avalanche, maybe," Halfdan replied, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Or something bigger moving on the slopes above us." They waited in tense silence, listening to the mountain's voice as it spoke in languages older than human words. After several minutes, the rumbling faded, leaving only the whisper of wind across stone and the soft crackle of their fire. "We need to talk about what comes after," Tormod said suddenly, his voice cutting through the lingering unease. "When we reach these southern settlements," Magnus described. "What then?" It was a fair question, and one Brynja had been avoiding. Their entire focus had been on survival, on reaching safety, on putting distance between themselves and the raiders who hunted them. But survival was not the same as living, and eventually they would need something more than mere existence. "I suppose we try to build new lives," she said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Find work, make homes, give Astrid a chance to grow up in peace." "And stay together?" Astrid asked quietly, her small voice carrying a weight of longing that broke Brynja's heart. The question hung in the cave's smoky air like an unspoken prayer. They had become family through shared hardship, bound by choices rather than blood, but that didn't guarantee permanence. The world had a way of scattering people despite their best intentions, and refugees rarely had the luxury of staying exactly where they wanted to be. "I'd like that," Magnus said simply. "Old men need purpose, and I've found mine in keeping you all alive and healthy." "I have nowhere else to go," Tormod admitted with painful honesty. "And even if I did, I wouldn't want to face it alone." All eyes turned to Halfdan, whose answer would matter most of all. He had the skills and reputation to make his own way anywhere in the Northern Territories. Jarls would pay handsomely for his service, and he could easily find a place among any warband that would have him. He owed them nothing beyond what he had already given. "I made a promise," he said finally, his scarred features serious in the firelight, "to be your shield against the world. That doesn't end when we reach safety. It just changes shape." Brynja felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Over the past months, she had learned to read the subtle signs of Halfdan's emotions, and she could see the truth behind his careful words. He stayed, not just from duty, but from love. Love for her, for Astrid, even for the unlikely family they had forged in the crucible of loss. "Then we stay together," she decided. "Whatever comes, we face it as family." Astrid smiled for the first time in weeks, a brief flash of the happy child she had once been. Magnus nodded with satisfaction, and Tormod's hand moved unconsciously to his silver ring, not with nervous energy this time, but with something approaching peace. Outside their small cave, the mountain wind howled its ancient songs of ice and stone. But inside, warmed by fire and fellowship, they had found something precious, the simple human miracle of choosing to care for each other despite a world that offered little reason for hope. Tomorrow would bring new dangers and fresh challenges. But tonight, they were not alone. Astrid stopped walking so suddenly that Brynja nearly stumbled into her. The child stood frozen on the narrow mountain path, her dark eyes fixed on something only she could see. Above her head, the air shimmered faintly, as if touched by heat waves that had no source in the cold mountain air. "Little Raven?" Halfdan's voice was gentle but alert, his hand moving instinctively toward Ironheart's handle. "What do you see?" "A crown," Astrid whispered, her voice carrying the strange, distant quality it took on during these episodes. "Made of storm clouds and lightning. It's floating right there, waiting for someone to claim it." Brynja followed her daughter's gaze, but saw nothing except empty air and the grey stone of the mountain peak ahead. Magnus moved closer, his healer's instincts recognizing something significant in the child's behavior. Over the past week, Astrid had begun having these visions, with increasing frequency, glimpses of things that weren't there, or perhaps things that existed in ways the rest of them couldn't perceive. "What does the crown look like?" Magnus asked carefully, his voice carrying none of the dismissive tone adults often used with children's imagination. "Silver and shadow," Astrid replied, her small hand reaching out as if to touch the invisible artifact, "with stars caught in the metal like dewdrops. But it's sad. It misses the one who used to wear it." A chill ran down Brynja's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain wind. There were old stories about children who could see beyond the veil of ordinary sight, who inherited gifts that allowed them to perceive the spiritual world overlapping their own. Her grandmother had spoken of such things in hushed tones, warning that the sight was both blessing and curse. Tormod's silver arm ring caught the pale sunlight as he moved nervously, his noble upbringing making him more aware than the others of what Astrid's words might signify. "The ghost crown of the Storm Lords," he breathed. "My father told stories about it when I was young. Said it was lost when the last of the old royal bloodlines died out 3 generations ago." "Just stories," Brynja said quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. She had learned to fear anything that might mark Astrid as different or special. The world was dangerous enough for ordinary refugees without adding supernatural complications. "Are they?" Magnus asked quietly. "Look at her, Brynja. Really look." Against her better judgment, Brynja studied her daughter's face. Astrid's eyes held a depth that seemed impossible for a 7-year-old, as if she were seeing not just the present moment, but layers of time stretching back through history. Her small features were composed with an otherworldly calm that made her seem far older than her years. "The crown wants to go home," Astrid continued, still staring at the empty air. "But it can't find the way alone. It needs someone who belongs to the old blood, someone who can hear the storm's voice." Halfdan exchanged a meaningful glance with Magnus. The old healer nodded slowly, confirming what the berserker had begun to suspect. They had all noticed the strange weather patterns that seemed to follow their journey. Sudden mists that hid their passage from pursuers, winds that cleared treacherous paths just ahead of their steps, brief breaks in snowfall that allowed them to find shelter when they needed it most. "Little raven," Halfdan said gently, kneeling beside Astrid so their eyes were level. "Have you been calling the storms to help us?" Astrid blinked, the distant look fading from her face as she returned to ordinary awareness. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Sometimes when I'm scared or cold, I think about warm wind and clear skies, and sometimes they come." Brynja felt the world shift beneath her feet like unstable scree. Everything she thought she understood about their situation was suddenly cast in new light. The unusual weather, their incredible luck in evading pursuit, even their ability to find food and shelter in this harsh landscape, none of it had been mere chance. "We need to talk about what this means," Tormod said, his voice tight with concern. "If she truly has the storm sight, if she's connected to the old royal bloodlines, there are people who would kill to possess that kind of power. Others who would kill to prevent it from being used. She's just a little girl," Brynja protested, though she knew the argument was weak. The world cared nothing for childhood innocence when larger forces were at play. "A little girl who can command the weather," Magnus pointed out gently. "That makes her either the most valuable person in the Northern Territories or the most dangerous. Possibly both." The implications crashed over Brynja like a mountain avalanche. If word spread about Astrid's abilities, they would never know peace again. Every ambitious Jarl would want to claim her. Every prophet would declare her blessed or cursed. Every enemy would see her as a threat to be eliminated. The simple refugee life she had imagined for them was impossible now. "What do we do?" she asked, hating how helpless she sounded. "We protect her," Halfdan said without hesitation. "Same as we've been doing, but more carefully. And we learn what we can about these gifts so we can help her understand them." "The old shrine," Magnus said suddenly, his eyes brightening with memory. 3 days' travel southeast of here, if the maps in my mind are accurate. It was dedicated to the Storm Lords in the ancient times, before the new gods claimed dominance. If anywhere holds answers about royal bloodlines and weather magic, it would be there. Astrid looked up at the adults surrounding her, seeming to understand that her simple words had changed everything. "Are you angry with me?" she asked in a small voice. Brynja knelt and pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Never," she whispered fiercely. "You are perfect exactly as you are. We just need to learn how to keep you safe." "The crown is gone now," Astrid murmured against her mother's shoulder. "But I think it'll come back. It's waiting for something." As they resumed their journey toward the ancient shrine, Brynja couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer simply fleeing danger, but walking toward a destiny none of them fully understood. The ghost crown might be invisible to her eyes, but its presence hung over them like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. Above them, the wind shifted patterns, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled despite the cloudless sky. The broken shield lay half buried in snow beside the ancient shrine, its painted surface cracked and faded, but still recognizable. Brynja's breath caught in her throat as she knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the familiar wolf's head emblazoned on what remained of the wood and leather. It had belonged to Eirik, her husband, lost somewhere in their desperate flight from the burning village. "How did it get here?" she whispered, lifting the damaged remnant with trembling hands. The shield was lighter than she remembered, weakened by exposure and time, but its presence felt like a message from beyond the grave. Magnus approached slowly, his weathered face grave with understanding. "The old man is dying," he had told them 3 days ago, his voice matter of fact despite the weight of his words. Now, studying the shrine and the artifacts scattered around it, he seemed to be wrestling with knowledge that went deeper than his healing arts. "This place draws things," he said finally. "Objects of power, items touched by strong emotion, remnants of those who have passed beyond. It's not coincidence that brought your husband's shield here. It's the nature of sacred ground, to call what belongs." Halfdan stood before the shrine itself, a weathered stone structure older than memory, carved with runes that seemed to shift when viewed directly. His massive frame was tense with recognition, as if the ancient symbols spoke to something deep in his blood. Ironheart hung silent at his side, but Brynja could see the way the legendary axe seemed to resonate with the shrine's presence. "I know this place," he said quietly. "My grandfather brought me here once, when I was barely older than Astrid, told me stories about the old kings, the storm callers who ruled these mountains before the clans divided them up like meat at a feast." Tormod examined the carvings with scholarly interest, his noble education serving him well in interpreting the ancient script. "These runes tell of binding oaths," he said, his finger following the carved lines. "Sworn service that passes from generation to generation, sealed in blood and storm." "What kind of oaths?" Brynja asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. "Protection oaths," Magnus replied, his voice carrying the weight of long-hidden knowledge. "The greatest warriors of each generation sworn to serve the Storm royal bloodline, guardians bound by magic and honor to defend the rightful heirs, even unto death." The implications struck Brynja like physical blows. She looked at Halfdan with new understanding, seeing not just the berserker who had saved them, but a man fulfilling an ancient duty he might not even fully comprehend. His presence in their lives, his inexplicable devotion to their survival, his willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers, none of it had been chance. "You knew," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Some part of you knew what she was." Halfdan's scarred features remained impassive, but she could see the truth in his eyes. "My grandfather spoke of dreams that would come to those bound by the oath. Visions of the royal blood awakening, calls that could not be ignored. I thought they were just stories until the night I found you. The night you heard our screams from 20 leagues away," Brynja continued, pieces falling into place like stones in an avalanche. "You didn't just happen to be near our village. You were called there. By something stronger than coincidence," he admitted. "The oath lives in my bloodline, whether I understand it or not. When the true heir was in danger, it pulled me to her side." Astrid had wandered to the far side of the shrine, her small hands pressed against a section of carved stone that seemed untouched by weather or time. As she stood there, the air around her began to shimmer again, and the distant rumble of thunder echoed from the clear sky above. "The crown wants me to touch the stone," she said in that distant voice she used during her visions. "It says there are words I need to hear, memories that were left here long ago." "Is it safe?" Brynja asked Magnus, her maternal instincts warring with the growing understanding of her daughter's destiny. The old healer studied the ancient carvings, his lips moving silently as he translated runes that predated written history. "The shrine was built to preserve, not to harm," he said finally, "but the knowledge it contains that might change everything." "It already has," Tormod pointed out grimly. "The moment we accepted what she is, our path was set. We can't go back to being simple refugees. Too much depends on what happens next." Brynja felt the broken shield's weight in her hands, like a physical representation of all her losses. Eric was gone. Their village was ash. Their old life was destroyed beyond recovery. But perhaps that destruction had been necessary to clear the way for something larger, something that mattered beyond their personal grief. "Do it," she told Astrid, making a choice that would echo through generations. "Touch the stone, hear what the voices have to say." Astrid pressed her palms against the ancient carving, and the world exploded into light and sound. Thunder crashed overhead despite the cloudless sky, and wind whipped around the shrine with supernatural force. The child's eyes rolled back, showing only white, as power older than kingdoms flowed through her small frame. "I see them," she gasped, her voice layered with harmonics that spoke of royal authority and storm-born might. "The kings and queens who came before. They're showing me the true crown, the real one, hidden where only the worthy can find it. And they're telling me about the armies that are coming, the wars that will reshape the North, the choice that will determine whether the old blood rises or dies forever." The vision lasted only moments, but when it ended, Astrid collapsed to the snow-covered ground, her face pale with exhaustion. Brynja rushed to her side, gathering her daughter close while fighting back tears of fear and pride and terrible understanding. "What did you see?" Magnus asked gently. "Everything," Astrid whispered, her young voice carrying the weight of inherited destiny. "All of it. And Mama, we can't go to the southern settlements anymore. We have to go north, back toward the danger. There's something hidden there that belongs to us, and if we don't claim it soon, it'll be lost forever." Brynja looked at the broken shield in her hands, the last remnant of her old life, damaged beyond repair but still present, still meaningful. Like their journey, like their family, like everything they had thought they understood about their place in the world. Some things could not be fixed, only transformed into something entirely new. The true crown of storms lay before them in the hidden chamber beneath the shrine, its presence so overwhelming that the air itself seemed to thrum with contained lightning. Unlike the ghostly vision Astrid had been seeing, this crown was undeniably real, forged from metal that shifted between silver and storm grey, set with gems that pulsed like captured starlight. "By all the old gods," Magnus breathed, his voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. "It's real. After all these years of stories and legends, it's actually real." The crown rested on an altar, carved from a single massive stone, surrounded by murals that told the complete history of the Storm royal bloodline. The paintings showed kings and queens commanding lightning, calling down rain to end droughts, turning hurricanes aside from populated lands. But the final mural was different. It showed a small girl, no older than Astrid, wearing the crown while armies knelt before her. "The prophecy?" Tormod whispered, his silver arm ring catching reflected light from the crown's gems. "My tutors spoke of it when I was young. When the northern clans shed each other's blood like rain, when the old gods turn their faces away, when hope dies in the hearts of the faithful, then shall the Stormchild rise to claim her birthright and heal the broken land." Halfdan stood perfectly still, but Brynja could see the tension radiating from his massive frame. His hand rested on Ironheart's handle, and the legendary axe seemed to vibrate with recognition. "My grandfather's ring," he said suddenly, pulling a simple band of blackened metal from beneath his shirt. "He said it would grow warm when the time came to fulfill the ancient oath." The ring was nearly too hot to touch. glowing with inner fire that spoke of magic older than memory. As Halfdan held it up, runes appeared along its surface, the same script that covered the shrine walls, the same binding words that had tied his bloodline to royal service for countless generations. "You're bound to her," Magnus realized, studying the glowing ring with scholarly fascination. "Not just by choice or circumstance, but by powers that predate the current age. Your family swore service to the Storm Throne, and that oath lives in your very blood." Astrid approached the altar slowly, her dark eyes reflecting the crown's ethereal light. As she drew near, the chamber filled with the sound of distant thunder, and wind began to circle through the enclosed space, despite the lack of any opening to the outside world. "It's calling to me," she said simply, "like it's been waiting all this time for me to find it." "Wait," Brynja called out, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. "We don't know what will happen if you touch it. What if it's dangerous? What if it changes you into something other than your daughter?" Astrid finished gently. "Mama, I'm already changing. The visions, the storms that follow us, the way I can see things others can't. The crown isn't going to make me different. It's going to help me understand what I already am." The truth of those words hit Brynja like a physical blow. She had been clinging to the hope that Astrid could remain an ordinary child despite everything they had witnessed, but that hope had always been an illusion. Her daughter was royal blood, heir to powers that could reshape the Northern Territories, and no amount of maternal love could change that destiny. "There's more," Tormod said quietly, his voice tight with emotion he was struggling to contain. "Something I haven't told you about my family's destruction." He turned to face them, his young features etched with pain and guilt. "My father wasn't killed by random raiders. He was assassinated because he had discovered something in the old records, something about the surviving royal bloodlines. He was murdered to prevent him from acting on that knowledge." "What kind of knowledge?" Magnus asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "Maps," Tormod replied, pulling a carefully wrapped bundle from his pack. "Locations where royal artifacts were hidden, genealogies showing which families carried storm royal blood, and most importantly, the prophecy that foretold when and how the crown would be reclaimed." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal ancient documents written in multiple hands, some sections clearly much older than others. The parchments were stained with what looked suspiciously like blood, and their edges showed signs of hasty cutting, as if they had been torn from larger volumes in desperate haste. "My father was killed by agents of Jarl Grimwald," Tormod continued, his voice growing steadier as the truth finally emerged. "The same man who destroyed your village, who hunted us through the mountains, who even now searches for the lost royal heir. He knows about Astrid, has known since the night her village burned. Everything that's happened to us, the raids, the pursuit, even our meeting, none of it was coincidence." The revelation struck them like lightning from a clear sky. Brynja felt the world shift around her as she understood the true scope of the conspiracy that had destroyed their lives. "He knows what she is," she whispered. "He's been hunting her specifically." "Not just hunting," Halfdan said grimly, his scarred features dark with understanding. "Eliminating. Grimwald wants to claim the Northern Territories for himself, and he can't do that while legitimate royal blood still exists. He's been systematically hunting down anyone with storm royal heritage, making it look like random raiding to avoid suspicion." "But why let us get this far?" Brynja demanded. "Why not kill us in the valley, or during the mountain crossing?" "Because he needed us to find the crown for him," Magnus realized, his old face pale with the implications. "He's been driving us toward it like sheep toward slaughter. Once Astrid claims her birthright, once the crown's power is awakened, he'll take it from her corpse and use it to legitimize his conquest of the North." As if summoned by their words, the sound of horses and armed men echoed down through the hidden chamber. Distant voices called out commands, and the ring of steel on stone suggested that their pursuers had finally caught up. "They're here," Tormod said unnecessarily, Grimwald's men have found the shrine. Astrid looked back at the adults, her young face serious with understanding that went far beyond her years. "We don't have time to debate anymore," she said quietly. "Either I take the crown and face whatever comes, or they take it, and everything our families died for was meaningless." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, echoing down stone passages that led to their hidden sanctuary. Soon there would be nowhere left to run, no more choices to make. The moment had arrived when words would give way to action, when all their preparations and revelations would be tested against cold steel and hard reality. "Do it," Brynja said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Claim your birthright, little Storm Queen. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Astrid reached toward the true crown of storms, her small fingers trembling with anticipation and terror in equal measure. The moment she touched the ancient metal, thunder crashed overhead with such force that dust rained down from the ceiling, and lightning began to dance between her fingers like living things. The chase was over. The real war was about to begin. The moment Astrid's fingers touched the true crown of storms, the world transformed around them. Lightning erupted from the ancient metal like caged starlight finally set free, cascading over the child's small frame in brilliant arcs that should have killed her, but instead seemed to make her more alive than ever before. Her dark hair lifted and danced as if underwater, and her eyes blazed with the deep blue-white of storm cores. Power flowed through the hidden chamber like a flood breaking through ancient dams. The murals on the walls began to glow, their painted figures moving and shifting as if responding to the crown's awakening. Kings and queens of the Storm royal bloodline turned their painted eyes toward Astrid, and Brynja swore she could hear whispered voices speaking in languages older than current memory. "It's working," Magnus breathed, his healer's instincts recognizing the fundamental change taking place. "The bloodline is awakening. After 3 generations of dormancy, the Storm Throne has an heir again." Halfdan's ancestor ring had become almost too hot to bear, its blackened metal glowing like iron fresh from the forge. The ancient binding that tied his family to royal service was reasserting itself with such force that he could feel his very bones humming with purpose and power. Ironheart sang at his side, the legendary axe's enchantments responding to the presence of its rightful sovereign. "I can feel them," he said, his voice rough with wonder and growing battle fury. "Generations of my bloodline who served the Storm Throne. Their strength, their knowledge, their unbreakable loyalty, all of it flowing into me like water into a dry well." Tormod clutched the ancient documents to his chest, his silver arm ring reflecting the crown's brilliance like captured lightning. "The prophecies speak of trials that must be faced," he said urgently. "Tests of worthiness, challenges that determine whether the heir is ready to wield such power. If Astrid can pass them, she becomes a true Storm Queen. If she fails—" "She won't fail," Brynja said with fierce certainty, though her heart hammered with terror at what her daughter was enduring. Lightning continued to pour through Astrid's small frame, and her feet had lifted several inches off the stone floor, held aloft by currents of pure magical energy. The sound of approaching enemies grew louder, echoing through the stone passages that led to their sanctuary. Steel rang against stone as armed men searched for the entrance to the crown chamber, and harsh voices shouted orders in the crude dialect of professional killers. Soon there would be nowhere left to hide, no more time for preparation or doubt. "How many do you think?" Magnus asked, his old hands steady despite the circumstances as he prepared what remained of his healing supplies. If they survived the coming fight, there would be wounds to tend and blood to stanch. "Too many," Halfdan replied honestly, his berserker instincts already calculating angles of attack and defensive positions. "But numbers matter less in a confined space. If we can control the entrances, make them come at us a few at a time. They'll have archers," Tormod pointed out grimly. "And if Grimwald himself is with them, he'll have battle magic of his own." The man didn't conquer half the northern territories through swordwork alone. As if summoned by his words, a new voice echoed down the stone passages deeper than the others, carrying an authority that spoke of long command and absolute ruthlessness. Jarl Grimwald had arrived to claim his prize, and his presence seemed to make the very air grow colder. "I know you can hear me, little Stormseed," the Jarl's voice called out, honey smooth despite the menace beneath. "There's nowhere left to run, no more mountains to hide behind. Come out peacefully, and I promise your mother and her pet berserker will die quickly." Astrid's eyes snapped open, blazing with stormlight that had nothing of childhood innocence remaining in it. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics of thunder and wind, as if the weather itself was speaking through her throat. "I am no seed to be crushed underfoot," she replied, her words somehow carrying through stone to reach their enemies. "I am the storm made flesh, heir to powers you cannot imagine, rightful ruler of lands you have stolen through treachery and blood." The crown settled onto her head as if it had been forged specifically for her, its storm-grey metal shifting to match her dark hair perfectly. Lightning continued to dance around her small form, but now it was controlled, purposeful, responding to her will rather than overwhelming her senses. "My lord," Brynja whispered, seeing her daughter transformed into something magnificent and terrible. The child she had born and raised was still there, visible in the familiar features and the stubborn set of her jaw, but she had become something more, a vessel for powers that could reshape the world. "The crown chooses its bearer," Magnus said with scholarly fascination overriding his fear. "It cannot be claimed by force or inherited through conquest. Only true royal blood can wear it without being destroyed, and only the worthy can command its full power." Halfdan stepped forward, his massive frame positioned between the chamber's entrance and the newly crowned queen. Ironheart felt light as a feather in his hands, its enchanted blade eager to taste the blood of those who would threaten his sovereign. The ancestor ring had fused itself to his finger, becoming part of him in a way that spoke of magic older than kingdoms. "My queen," he said formally, going to one knee before Astrid with natural grace that belied his size, "I am yours to command, as my bloodline has been yours for 30 generations. What are your orders?" The sight of the legendary berserker kneeling before her 7-year-old daughter sent another shock through Brynja's already overwhelmed mind. But Astrid accepted the homage as if she had been born to it, her storm-lit eyes focusing on Halfdan with recognition that went deeper than memory. "Rise, my champion," she commanded, and the words carried such natural authority that Halfdan obeyed without conscious thought. "We stand at the crossroads of history. Either we break the cycle of violence that has torn the North apart, or we fall and watch everything our bloodlines protected be consumed by greed and ambition." Tormod spread his father's documents on the altar beside the crown's resting place, their ancient parchments glowing with reflected stormlight. "The maps show other hidden caches," he said urgently. "Weapons, artifacts, even sealed chambers where loyal retainers wait in magical sleep. If we can reach them, we fight with what we have." Astrid interrupted, her transformed voice cutting through his desperate planning. "The true test of a ruler is not the power at their disposal, but the courage to face impossible odds with whatever resources remain." The sound of discovery echoed through the passages, shouts of triumph, as Grimwald's men found the hidden entrance to the crown chamber. Soon they would pour through that narrow opening like water through a broken dam, and all their preparations would be tested against the harsh reality of combat. "Form up," Halfdan commanded, his voice carrying the authority of countless battles. "Magnus, stay back and guard our queen. Tormod, take the left flank and watch for crossbow bolts. Brynja fights beside you," she finished firmly, her sword singing as she drew it from its sheath. "My daughter is a queen now, but I'm still her mother. No one reaches her while I draw breath." Lightning began to build around Astrid like a gathering storm, and the temperature in the chamber dropped as supernatural cold preceded the arrival of weather magic that could level mountains. The true crown of storms pulsed with power that made the ancient stones tremble, and somewhere in the distance thunder answered its call. "Let them come," the newly crowned Storm Queen said, her voice carrying the promise of hurricanes and the fury of winter gales. "They seek to claim a crown through murder and theft. Instead, they will learn why the Storm Throne has never fallen to conquest, and why those who serve it willingly are more powerful than any army." The first armed shapes appeared at the chamber entrance, steel gleaming in the stormlight, as Grimwald's killers prepared to claim their prize through force of arms. The final battle for the future of the North was about to begin. The first wave of Grimwald's warriors poured through the chamber entrance like hungry wolves, their weapons gleaming with professional competence that spoke of countless victories against lesser foes. But they faltered at the threshold, their advance slowing to a stunned crawl as they beheld the impossible sight before them. The storm crown blazed on Astrid's head like captured lightning, its ancient power filling the chamber with crackling energy that made the air itself sing with tension. The child who had fled burning villages now stood transformed into something from the oldest legends, a storm queen in truth, wreathed in power that made her seem far larger than her 7 years. "By the dark gods," one of the raiders breathed, his sword trembling in suddenly nerveless fingers. "The crown, it's real. The Storm Throne has an heir again." "Lightning," answered Astrid's will like obedient hounds, arcing from her small hands to strike the stone walls around the entrance. The bolts carved deep gouges in granite that had stood for millennia, and the smell of ozone filled the air with sharp intensity that made everyone's skin prickle with supernatural charge. Halfdan moved like flowing death incarnate, his berserker heritage amplified by the crown's presence until he became something beyond mortal understanding. Ironheart sang through the air in perfect arcs, the legendary axe's enchanted blade carving through mail and bone with equal ease. The ancestor ring fused to his finger blazed with inner fire, and his movements carried the accumulated skill of 30 generations of royal guardians. The first raider to reach him died so quickly that his companions barely saw the killing stroke. The second managed to raise his shield before Ironheart split it in half, continuing through to open his chest like a butcher's cleaver. Blood sprayed across the ancient murals, and the painted Storm Kings seemed to nod approvingly at the carnage done in their names. Brynja fought beside her transformed daughter with the desperate fury of a mother defending her young. Her swordwork lacked Halfdan's supernatural skill, but what it missed in technique it made up for in raw determination. She had lost too much already: her husband, her home, her peaceful life, and she would not lose Astrid as well, not when they stood so close to victory. A raider's spear thrust nearly took her in the ribs, but Tormod appeared at her side like an avenging angel, his blade turning the strike aside before opening the attacker's throat. The young nobleman moved with deadly grace, his silver arm ring catching stormlight, as he proved that gentle birth did not mean soft hands or weak will. "Stay close to the Queen," he shouted over the din of battle. "They're trying to separate us. Isolate her so their archers can duck 'em." His warning came too late. Crossbow bolts hissed through the air like angry wasps, their steel points aimed with professional precision at Astrid's small form. But lightning met them halfway, reducing the wooden shafts to ash and the metal tips to slag that scattered harmlessly across the stone floor. "You think to kill me with toys and trinkets?" Astrid's voice carried harmonics of thunder and wind, filling the chamber with sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am the storm's child, heir to powers older than your petty ambitions. Your weapons cannot touch me here." More warriors pressed through the entrance, but the narrow opening worked in the defenders' favor, forcing the attackers to come at them in small groups rather than overwhelming waves. Magnus had retreated to the chamber's far wall, his healer's training keeping him out of direct combat while he tended to minor wounds and watched for opportunities to assist. The old man's medicine pouch hung nearly empty at his side, its precious contents depleted by months of caring for their small group. But his eyes remained sharp, and his mind catalogued every injury and weakness among their enemies with the cold precision of one who had learned to find life in the midst of death. "Halfdan," he called out, pointing toward the entrance. "They're bringing up something heavy, a battering ram or siege engine. If they break through in force—" His warning was cut off by a new voice that froze every warrior in place. Jarl Grimwald himself, stepping through the entrance with the casual confidence of a man who had never known defeat. He wore mail that glittered like scales, and his sword carried runes that pulsed with their own malevolent light. "Enough," the Jarl commanded, and his voice carried an authority that made even his own men step aside. "You've played at war long enough, little pretender. Time to learn the difference between a child's magic tricks and true power." Dark energy began to gather around Grimwald's blade, and the temperature in the chamber dropped as if winter itself had followed him into their sanctuary. Whatever magic he commanded, it was old and hungry and utterly opposed to the stormlight that blazed from Astrid's crown. "The false king reveals himself at last," Astrid replied, her young voice carrying such regal authority that several of Grimwald's warriors actually began to kneel before catching themselves. "Come then, usurper, face the true heir, and learn why the Storm Throne has never fallen to pretenders and murderers." Lightning began to build around the chamber like a gathering hurricane, and the ancient stones trembled with power that had slept for generations. The clash between storm and shadow shook the very foundations of the ancient shrine. Grimwald's dark magic met Astrid's lightning in the center of the chamber, their opposing forces creating a maelstrom of energy that turned the air itself into a weapon. Stone cracked and groaned under the pressure, and the painted murals began to blur as reality bent around the conflicting powers. Halfdan found himself caught between worlds, the berserker rage that had carried him through countless battles, and the desperate need to protect his young queen from forces that could destroy them all. The ancestor ring burned against his finger like molten gold, flooding his mind with the memories and skills of generations past. He could feel their presence, 30 generations of royal guardians lending him their strength. But even enhanced by ancestral magic, he struggled against Grimwald's elite warriors. These were not common raiders, but battle-hardened veterans who had conquered kingdoms alongside their lord. Their leader, a scarred giant nearly as large as Halfdan himself, wielded a two-handed sword with deadly precision. "The berserker bleeds," the warrior taunted, noting the crimson flowing from a dozen minor wounds across Halfdan's massive frame. "Legend dies hard, but it still dies." Ironheart met the giant's blade in a shower of sparks, legendary steel ringing against enchanted iron. For a moment they were locked together, strength against strength, will against will. Then Halfdan heard something that changed everything, Astrid's voice, not commanding the storm, but crying out in pain. The peace stone lay before the altar where Grimwald had thrown it, a simple granite sphere carved with runes of binding and control. Ancient magic flowed from its surface, designed to calm raging storms and quell supernatural fury. But it was also draining Astrid's power, pulling the lightning from her small hands and leaving her defenseless. "A useful trinket," Grimwald said with cold satisfaction as the storm crown's brilliance began to dim. "Crafted specifically to neutralize storm royal magic. Your ancestors were wise enough to create fail-safes, little pretender, though they never imagined those fail-safes would be turned against their own bloodline." Brynja lunged toward the peace stone, desperate to remove it from the chamber, but Grimwald's warriors blocked her path. Tormod fought beside her with noble fury, his silver arm ring, leaving trails of light as his blade carved through enemy ranks. But they were being driven back, overwhelmed by superior numbers and the neutralizing effect of the ancient artifact. "You cannot win," Grimwald continued, advancing on the weakening Astrid with predatory confidence. "Storm royal power is impressive, but it has always been limited by compassion, by the need to protect rather than destroy. I have no such weaknesses. Dark energy coalesced around his rune blade, shadow magic that fed on pain and fear rather than natural forces. Where Astrid's lightning had been beautiful in its terrible power, Grimwald's darkness was simply hungry, an absence that devoured light and hope with equal appetite. But as he raised his weapon for the killing blow, something unexpected happened. Halfdan broke away from his duel, throwing himself between the Jarl and the young queen with berserker fury that transcended human limitation. The ancestor ring exploded with light, and suddenly he wasn't just one warrior, but 30, the accumulated might of every guardian who had ever served the Storm Throne. "You want her?" he roared, Ironheart sweeping in an arc that forced Grimwald to retreat. "Come through me first, Oathbreaker. Come through 30 generations of royal guardians who died before they failed their duty." The legendary axe carved through the air with unstoppable force, its enchanted edge seeking the heart of the man who had brought such suffering to the north. But Grimwald was more than mortal as well, his dark magic turning aside, blows that should have split him in half. In that moment of supreme conflict, Tormod made a choice that would echo through legend. Abandoning his own fight, he threw himself at the Peace Stone, his body covering the ancient artifact, even as Grimwald's remaining warriors turned their blades on him. Steel bit deep into noble flesh, and his silver arm ring caught the last light of the storm crown as his blood began to pool on the ancient stones. "For the true queen," he gasped, his sacrifice breaking the Peace Stone's binding long enough for storm magic to surge back into the chamber. Lightning erupted from Astrid's hands with renewed fury. But now it was different, controlled, precise, guided by wisdom that came from witnessing true loyalty and sacrifice. The wild storm child was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, a queen who understood the weight of crown and duty. "You taught me something valuable," she told Grimwald, as lightning danced between her fingers like obedient pets. "A ruler's greatest power isn't in the storm they can call, but in the love they inspire. You have armies because men fear you. I have guardians because they choose to serve." Thunder crashed overhead despite the underground chamber, and the very stones began to sing with harmonics that spoke of judgment long delayed, but finally arrived. The final moment of the ancient prophecy had come. 1 year later, the mountain valley that had once known only wind and stone now rang with the laughter of children and the honest sounds of a thriving settlement. Where ancient trails had wound through barren peaks, well-traveled paths now connected a dozen small communities that looked to the young Storm Queen for guidance and protection. Brynja stood in the doorway of their great hall, not a palace of gold and marble, but a sturdy building of mountain stone and northern timber that spoke of permanence without pretension. Through the windows, she could see Astrid in the settlement's center, surrounded by a group of young ones who hung on her every word as she taught them to read the sky for signs of changing weather. The true crown of storms no longer blazed with the fierce light of battle. Instead, it rested on Astrid's head like captured starlight, its power controlled and channeled into the practical magic of ensuring good harvests and protecting the valley from the worst winter storms. The crown had become what it was always meant to be, not a weapon of conquest, but a tool of stewardship. "She's grown," Magnus observed, joining Brynja at the window. The old healer moved more slowly these days, his medicine pouch replaced by a collection of apprentices who helped him tend the settlement's needs. But his eyes remained sharp, and his presence brought comfort to anyone who had known the dark times before their queen's rise. "In more ways than I expected," Brynja replied, watching as Astrid patiently helped a younger child understand the difference between storm clouds and rain clouds. The 7-year-old refugee who had clutched a broken doll was gone, replaced by a young ruler who carried the weight of leadership with grace beyond her years. Halfdan emerged from the settlement's smithy, Ironheart slung across his back as always, though these days the legendary axe was more likely to be used for splitting timber than splitting skulls. The ancestor ring had settled into a comfortable glow on his finger, no longer burning with desperate magic, but warm with the satisfaction of oaths fulfilled and duties honorably discharged. "The new families from the eastern settlements have arrived," he reported, settling beside Brynja with the easy familiarity of a husband speaking to his wife. Their wedding 6 months ago had been a simple affair, no grand ceremony, just heartfelt vows spoken before their chosen family and sealed with a crown of wildflowers that Astrid had woven herself. "How many this time?" Brynja asked, though she already knew the answer would strain their resources. Word of the Storm Queen's kingdom had spread throughout the northern territories, drawing refugees and settlers who sought a place where strength protected rather than oppressed. 3 families, 14 souls total," Halfdan replied, "including 6 children who've never known anything but running and hiding. They look at our young ones playing in the open air like it's the greatest magic they've ever witnessed." Through the window, they could see the memorial grove, where simple stones marked the graves of Magnus and Tormod, the old healer who had died peacefully in his sleep the previous winter, and the young nobleman whose sacrifice had made their victory possible. Fresh flowers adorned both markers, placed there by hands that would never forget what those men had given. "Do you ever wonder what he would think of all this?" Brynja asked, gesturing toward the thriving settlement that had grown from their desperate struggle. "Tormod?" Halfdan considered the question carefully. "I think he'd be amazed that his silver arm ring is now worn by the settlement's lead carpenter, a former slave, who learned his freedom was worth more than any noble bloodline." It was true. The ornate ring that had once symbolized inherited privilege now adorned the finger of a man who had earned his place through skill and character rather than accident of birth. The transformation seemed fitting for a kingdom built on chosen family rather than blood ties. Astrid finished her lesson and approached the great hall, her small entourage of students trailing behind like devoted ducklings. The new crown, as she had taken to calling the simple circlet Halfdan had forged for everyday wear, caught the afternoon light with humble beauty that somehow seemed more regal than any amount of gold or precious stones. "Mama," she called out, her voice carrying the easy authority of someone who had learned to command through service rather than fear. "The council meeting is starting. The trade delegates from the southern settlements want to discuss the grain exchange for next season." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The southern settlements they had once hoped to reach as desperate refugees now sent envoys to negotiate with their mountain kingdom as equals. The wheel of fortune had turned in ways none of them could have imagined during those dark months of flight and fear. "Coming, my queen," Brynja replied formally, then grinned. "But first, did you remember to practice your letters like you promised?" Astrid's regal composure cracked just enough to reveal the 10-year-old beneath the crown. "Most of them," she admitted. "But the ancient runic script is really difficult, and I got distracted trying to teach the weather-sensing exercises to the younger children." "Delegating royal education to avoid homework," Halfdan observed with mock seriousness. "Truly, she has learned the most essential skill of leadership." As they walked toward the council chamber together, queen, mother, champion, and the ghosts of all those who had shaped their journey, Brynja reflected on how much had changed since that desperate night when gods had seemed silent and hope had felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. The gods might still be quiet, but their silence no longer mattered. In its place, they had built something better, a kingdom founded on the simple truth that ordinary people choosing to care for each other could accomplish miracles that no amount of divine intervention could match. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but they came at their queen's call, bringing the gentle rain that would nourish the valley's crops and ensure another season of abundance. Some crowns were inherited, others were earned, and the greatest of all were forged in the crucible of shared sacrifice, worn not as symbols of power over others, but as promises to serve something larger than oneself. The Storm Queen's reign had truly begun.